So symptoms, for irritable bowel syndrome can be so unpredictable, right? It could be like you have some gas in your stomach, you have some bloating, some cramping, um, or constipation and diarrhea. So it's kind of like, a seesaw, right? So that's what we're going to be talking about today, how to take care of your irritable bowel syndrome with a FODMAP diet. So we have a nutritionist from Australia. So just hang on for 1 second. And she has been trained in Monash University by Monash, right? I think everybody knows about that. If not, then that's one of the things. So it's Joanna. So Joanna has joined us right now. Hi, Joanna. How are you?
Hi, Amisha. Lovely to meet you.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. I was just telling the viewers, how unpredictable the symptoms are for irritable bowel
Oh,
syndrome.
absolutely. So, and I think it's that unpredictability that makes it so difficult to live with because you don't know what your gut's going to do from day to day.
Yes, and then we are talking about FODMAP diet, right? So
Yes.
so before that, just tell us a little bit about yourself. You specialize in gut health. You are a dietitian and registered nurse as well, Joanna?
Yes, that's correct. So I spent the first half of my working life as a registered nurse. About halfway through there, I decided to go back to university and I did a Master's of Dietetics, which then qualified me as a registered dietitian. Um, I now specialize, so I've had IBS for longer than I can remember. I don't know what life was like without it. So it's something that I've been really passionate about because it's something that's really near and dear to my heart. And so that's sort of what has drawn me into gut health. And that's what I love working with people to help them calm their gut, so manage those symptoms, but also pinpoint what their triggers are, because that's when we can remove that unpredictability and it puts them back in charge of their gut instead of their gut being in charge of them. So that's what I do.
No, I think that's very inspiring. So just tell us about your symptoms since you had IBS for a long, long time, and then now you are recovered. You don't have IBS, so that's the best way, a best case story here.
So I still have IBS, but it's very well managed. And as long
Okay.
as I manage it well, my symptoms are really well controlled.
Mhm.
And I guess because I know what my triggers are, it means that it's not unpredictable. So I know there are certain foods that I know just don't agree with me. And as long as I avoid those foods, I'm pretty good. Obviously, IBS, it's a package deal. So it's about it's diet, managing mental health and stress levels, making sure you're getting enough sleep, making sure you're getting hydrated, doing some light exercise and keeping generally healthy. But when all of those things are managed, 99% of the time, or 99.9, I'm 100% these days. When I do if I do choose to eat one of my trigger foods, so because they don't damage my body, but they do cause symptoms. The types of things I get is that I get a lot of bloating, I get a lot of pain, and I get a lot of neurological symptoms associated with that. So depression and anxiety,
Mm.
which very clearly come when I eat my trigger foods and very clearly disappear once that has left my body again.
Okay, well, okay, so let's just talk about the FODMAP, and there's a lot of scientific research, right, on the FODMAP diet as well.
Yes, so FODMAP is probably the most well-researched and most well-evidenced diet to manage IBS. It was first published and researched back in 2006
Mhm.
by Monash University and Sue Shepherd, and they found that around 75% of people who had IBS got a significant and a consistent improvement by following a low FODMAP diet. They told the world about it, and other centres have gone and researched it as well, and we now have a few meta-analyses that have also shown it to be effective for anywhere between, so the research studies show anywhere between about 60% up to about 85%, depending on which study you look at,
Mhm.
mostly randomized controlled trials where we've put people on a FODMAP diet and we've measured their symptom responses. So it's really exciting, and it's great to know that we can manage things with IBS with something as easy as diet. So, and we don't have to use things like medications and those
Mhm.
sorts of things to manage it. So it puts the person with IBS back in control of their condition.
No, I think that's really great. So what are FODMAPs? So let's just understand. Let's go a little bit deeper to understand it.
Yep, absolutely. So FODMAPs are certain types of carbohydrates. So all FODMAPs are carbohydrates, but not all carbohydrates are FODMAPs, if you imagine those old circle diagrams from school. These particular types of carbohydrates are not digested well in some people. And because they're not digested properly, they stay in the digestive tract. They travel through the small intestine and into the large intestine. And when they're in the large intestine, two things happen. So the first one is that FODMAPs are quite osmotic. So that means they attract water into the intestines and they fill the intestines with water. And that's why we see a lot of people suffer with diarrhea from FODMAPs, because all that water has to go somewhere and there's only one way out. The other thing that FODMAPs do is our gut microbiome is mostly in our large intestine. We've all got about 2 kilos of bacteria down there. And there's nothing those bacteria like more than to feed on FODMAPs. And when the FODMAPs are there, the bacteria will feed on them. They will create gas as a side effect. That gas obviously creates bloating. It puts pressure on the walls of the intestines and irritates all those nerve endings in the gut, causing pain, changing how fast or slow the bowel is choosing to move.
Wow. Okay. So then now when you, okay, so when you eat, let's take an example of a low FODMAP food, right?
Yes,
what are the different foods?
So low FODMAP food. So there's actually lots of things you can eat on a low FODMAP diet. Firstly, because FODMAPs are types of carbohydrates, foods like meat, chicken, fish, eggs, fats, oils, cheese, all of those foods that don't contain carbohydrates, they're all low FODMAP, and they can all be eaten freely on a FODMAP diet without limitation. Where we do find FODMAPs is they're in a lot of fruits and vegetables, things like apples, stone fruits, garlic, onion. We see them in grains like wheat. We see them in legumes like your kidney beans, sweeteners like honey, and lactose that's in milk is one of the FODMAPs as well. The thing is that obviously FODMAPs are in lots of those really healthy foods, but it's a low FODMAP diet. It's not a no FODMAP diet. So a lot of these foods at a small serve size will be low FODMAP, but then at a larger serve size become high FODMAP. So it's more about recognizing which foods contain them and at what level that cutoff is where they become moderate or high FODMAP. And the best way to do that, so like I said, Monash were the first university to publish the research. They now have a smartphone app, and their smartphone app lists hundreds of foods, and they all have traffic lights. So a green traffic light is low FODMAP, a yellow traffic light is moderate, and a red traffic light is high FODMAP. So we can use that to determine, firstly, what we're going to eat, and secondly, how much of that food we're going to eat.
Okay, so let's talk about a sample lunch, or what would be a sample lunch look like with a low FODMAP diet?
Yeah. So what I had for lunch today was actually low FODMAP, and just out of coincidence, but it was actually also a vegetarian day as well. So that was interesting. So I had firm tofu, which was stir fried. And I served that with zucchini and carrots and capsicum, which were also stir fried. And I had that on rice, which is low FODMAP at quite large serves. And on top of that, I put a pesto. Now, pesto usually contains garlic, which would make it high FODMAP. I just chucked some spinach and some pine nuts and some garlic infused olive oil, which is low FODMAP, and a bit of lemon juice into my NutriBullet and whizzed that up to make a little pesto. And I stirred that on top of my veggies. So that would be a low FODMAP lunch.
Okay. All right. So, and then, let's say someone has an IBS, like yourself. So do you have to follow the FODMAP diet all throughout your life, or there can be some kind of cheat days here?
Yeah, and that's actually one of the really great things about the FODMAP diet is that it's not a game of perfect. It doesn't have to be a game of perfect, and it's not a forever diet. So low FODMAP diet it's actually designed to be a process that you use to work out what foods trigger you and what foods don't trigger you. So we start with an elimination phase, which goes for about 2 to 6 weeks. Okay. During that phase, you're only going to eat low FODMAP foods. And what we want to take away from that is that we want to know, does the FODMAP diet work for you? Mm-hmm. So that's all we want to know. And if you go out for dinner at some point, once or twice during that elimination phase, that's still not going to prevent you from knowing if FODMAP makes a difference to your symptoms or not. FODMAPs don't damage the body, and if anything, they're actually super healthy. I mean, there are fruits and vegetables. They're really good for us. Yeah. They don't cause damage. They don't cause inflammation. So once we know whether FODMAP works or not, we then move to a reintroduction stage. I see. There are 4 types of FODMAPs, and there are also further subgroups as well. Okay. And what we do is we reintroduce all those subgroups one at a time and see at what point, if we reintroduce it, first of all, does it trigger symptoms in you or doesn't it? And secondly, if it does trigger symptoms, we want to know where that threshold is for you, because that's going to be different in everybody. And we may find that you're okay with half a clove of garlic, but you're not okay with a whole clove of garlic. Mm-hmm. And once we've got all that information of how you respond to each of those FODMAPs, we then reintroduce all of the ones you tolerate. We introduce smaller serves of the threshold that you don't tolerate very well. So our ultimate goal is maximum variety and minimum symptoms. And again, like I said, if you choose to eat a high FODMAP food down the track, knowing that it's a trigger for you, yes, that may cause symptoms, but no, it won't damage your body. It won't shorten your lifespan, and it will not make you need surgery or anything like that. So I often talk to people, treat it like you might have treated alcohol in university. If you're going to go out and have a big night, you're going to expect to have a hangover the next day. Yeah. FODMAPs are the same. If you're going to go out and eat a lot of them, you're going to expect to have some gut symptoms the next day. Mm-hmm. And that's okay, because sometimes going out and having that social connection and spending time with friends and family is more important to your quality of life than strictly avoiding triggers 100% of the time. So it's about that balance.
Sure. So the one other question that comes to my mind is, like, is there any testing? Like, let's say a client comes to you with all these symptoms of gas, bloating, and what have you. Do you test them some kind of a GI test or some food sensitivity test before and then after 3-4 months to kind of see what's happening?
Yep, sure. So the first thing I'm going to do is, IBS symptoms include things like pain, bloating, wind, and altered bowel movements. There are some quite serious medical conditions that can cause identical symptoms, things like celiac disease, IBD, even bowel cancers. I want to know that we've been tested for those and we've had those excluded before I assume that we're actually dealing with IBS. So that's the very first thing I want to do. Once we know that that's not what's going on and we are dealing with IBS, there are no really reliable testing methods that show high correlation to what you eat and what symptoms you get. So in terms of FODMAP, IgG tests, Vega testing, hair testing, that will not identify FODMAP sensitivity. So we don't use any of those. There are breath tests that you can use. And in the old days, we thought breath tests were really reliable and really useful. We now know that when we look at the research that when people do breath tests, they can get different results on different days. So they're not consistent in terms of that. We know that people who don't have IBS get very similar results to people who do have IBS. So it doesn't always reflect that food is going to cause you problems. I guess the way I see it is that, yes, breath tests can identify a malabsorption, but they don't identify if that malabsorption is causing you symptoms or not. And if the malabsorption doesn't cause you damage, then we only want to limit the food if you get symptoms. And the only way to do that is through a food modifying your diet, take the symptoms away and see if we can trigger them.
No. All right. So I think, well, if someone has any questions, I see a lot of people kind of, joining. You're welcome to ask a question or comment or feedback, anything you'd like to ask. So what else? Okay, what else would you like the viewers to know about?
What else do I want people to know about the FODMAP diet? Staying on a low FODMAP diet for too long is not ideal.
I see.
So I think that's actually a really important one. We don't go on a FODMAP diet and stay on it. We know as little as 3 weeks on a strict low FODMAP diet will cause a reduction in abundance and diversity of gut microbiome. So obviously, if we're depleting gut microbiome, that then becomes an issue in itself. And there is some indication that that may affect IBS symptoms as well. So we end up so that's not ideal. It's not something that we're interested in, mostly because I guess it can be tricky to get enough fiber on a low FODMAP diet. So a lot of the time I'm making sure that somebody is actually meeting their fiber requirements while we're managing their symptoms. If they're not meeting their fiber requirements, I might bring in a fiber supplement, something like K-fiber or something like that, that is going to help us close that fiber gap.
Okay. Someone asked a question about, they wanted some more information about the elimination diet.
So the elimination diet, like I said, it goes for 2 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
During that time, my recommendation is to use the Monash app. And what we want to do is what do we do? Generally, I'll sit down with someone and we'll go through what they're eating. Then we'll go through that and we'll highlight all the high FODMAP foods that they're eating, or the foods that they're eating in high FODMAP serve sizes. And I will swap those for low FODMAP replacements. So if someone's using a lot of garlic in their cooking, I might use garlic infused olive oils that we might replace it with. We might replace it with the green part of the spring onion. There are also FreeFOD does some onion and garlic replaces, so we'll swap it for that. And we'll swap all those high FODMAP foods for low FODMAP foods for a period of 2 to 6 weeks. Usually we expect, so FODMAPs, they go in one end and they come out the other. That takes around 12 to 48 hours in most people, maybe 1 to 3 days. So we expect to see an improvement in gut symptoms in a few days to a week at the most. The reason we actually give it 4 to 6 weeks is that it tells us that it's not a coincidence that you're feeling better, that it is the removal of FODMAPs that have made the difference. It also gives you time to get your head around the diet, because FODMAPs are sometimes, they hide in very sneaky places, and certainly if you're things like muesli bars and things like that can have FODMAPs in them. So finding all those sneaky ones and making sure we've swapped them over. And then we want to know, does it make a difference?
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, I think this amazing session. I think it's so much information you've given to all the people who might be suffering from IBS or even some symptoms that we talked about. And FODMAP has scientifically proven, as you said that, right?
Yes. Yes.
And start slow. Okay. Someone saying, how do you know how long to be on the elimination diet?
Great question. Like I said, we expect to get a result in a few days to a week. We give it a little bit longer. If someone has not had results by that 3 to 4 week mark, that's when it's time to see a dietitian who is experienced in food sensitivities and FODMAPs, do some troubleshooting, get your diet checked. A lot of people that I've seen already have started a FODMAP diet, and because it's so well known these days, they sort of come to me already on a FODMAP diet.
Yeah.
And a large portion of them are not necessarily getting results, and we spend a lot of time troubleshooting. FODMAP's the most well-known diet for IBS, but it's not the only one. And that's where a dietitian can come in and say, work out, are you actually following a FODMAP diet, or are there a few sort of sneaky mistakes being made, or do you actually fit a different approach better? So and around that 3 to 4 week mark, if you're not getting results, that's when you really want to see a dietitian to discuss your options.
Sure. Okay, I hope we answered the questions. Any other questions, comments? You're welcome to say. We are almost ready to wrap up. Thank you so much, Joanna, for an amazing session. I think a lot of us suffer from bloating, not serious IBS, I would say that, but something or the other, right? Something's happening in our stomach on a day,
Yeah.
not on a, occasional basis. So this is really useful information for all of us. Anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up today?
I think I've said everything. I just want to
Yes.
say thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be sharing this information.
So I don't know, there was some question that happened. It just flew. The question just flew. Can you see the digestion?
Yes. Yeah, it asked about a Monash trained dietitian. So
Okay.
I myself am a Monash trained dietitian. The dietitians who work with me at Everyday Nutrition, we are all Monash trained FODMAP dietitians. Yes. We specialize in IBS. The Monash app also does have a list in it of dietitians that have completed their training as well. So there's a few options there. We do Zoom consults, so we're happy to see anyone from all over the world.
Oh, wow. That's great. That's great. And anyone who has a serious IBS, they should reach out to Monash dietitians, not try to experiment anything on their own, right?
Absolutely. It sounds like a straightforward diet, but once you get into it, there are a lot of complexities.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you so much, Joanna, again, and to all the viewers. Thank you so much for being with us and asking all these questions, and let us know how we can improve. With that, I'd like to wrap up this session and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.